Over the centuries, the xenopsychology department at the Galactic Academy had seen many unusual specimens, but none quite matched the humans in Professor Vexhai's Advanced Predator Studies class. Marcus Chen appeared unremarkable by most standards: medium height, dark hair, wearing the standard issue Academy jumpsuit. Yet something about his presence made the other students unconsciously shift their seats away from him. Professor Vexhai, a tall crystalline being from the Thra Collective, had been teaching interspecies psychology for over 200 years. She was proud of her knowledge of the predatory instincts that drove different species throughout the galaxy. Today's lesson would test every theory she had developed. "Class," she announced, her voice resonating through the translucent chambers of her torso. "Today, we examine fear response patterns across different evolutionary backgrounds. Fear, as you are aware, is a powerful equalizer. It transcends species, culture, and advancements in technology. The assembled students, Catharian insectoids, gaseous nebulans contained in environmental suits, scaled draconic descendants, and various other sentient species leaned forward with interest. All except Marcus, who sat quietly, taking notes with an almost meditative calm. For this demonstration, Professor Vexhai continued, I've arranged for a very special guest." She gestured toward the reinforced observation chamber that dominated one wall of the classroom. "May I present a void stalker, also known colloquially as a fear beast." As the creature was brought in on a heavily shielded transport platform, the entire class retreated. The void stalker was a nightmare made manifest, roughly the size of a large earth wolf. Its body seemed to absorb light itself. Its form constantly shifted between solid and ethereal, and where its eyes should have been, 2 points of absolute darkness, gazed out at the assembled students. The most disturbing thing about it was how the form was surrounded by visible tendrils of psychic energy that were looking for fear to feed on. "Void stalkers," the professor explained, her voice betraying a slight tremor, "are perhaps the most efficient predators in known space. They don't hunt for sustenance in the traditional sense. They feed on terror itself. Their psychic abilities allow them to manifest their prey's deepest fears, creating a feedback loop that typically results in complete psychological breakdown before the physical kill." Several students had already activated their personal shield generators. The Nebulan's environmental suits were cycling through stress response protocols, and one of the Catharians was unconsciously secreting defensive pheromones. Professor Vexheim rechecked her readings and noted that Class A psionic dampeners are currently keeping the creature contained. However, in order to observe how our diverse class population responds to fear, we will gradually reduce the dampening field for this demonstration. Marcus seemed unaffected by the writhing mass of predatory evil just meters away as he continued to take notes. Professor Vexhai noticed this and made a mental note to observe the human more closely. "Beginning dampening field reduction," she announced. As the psionic barriers weakened, the Void Stalker's influence began to seep into the classroom. The creature's head snapped toward the assembled students, its void-black gaze sweeping across them like a searchlight. Where it looked, students began to show signs of distress. The Catharians' chittering became more rapid. The Nebulan's suits registered. Elevated stress hormones and the draconic descendants unconsciously bared their teeth in defensive postures. But then, something unprecedented happened. The Void Stalker's gaze fell upon Marcus, and instead of the expected psychic assault, the creature simply stopped. The writhing tendrils of psychic energy that had been eagerly pursuing the other students suddenly stopped, and its constantly shifting form slightly solidified. While examining her instruments, Professor Vexheim murmured, "Fascinating. The creature seems to have encountered some form of resistance." The Void Stalker tilted its head in what almost appeared to be confusion. It focused more intently on Marcus, and the human finally looked up from his notes to meet the creature's gaze directly. What happened next would be discussed in xenopsychology circles for decades to come. The Void Stalker, one of the most feared predators in the galaxy, began to whimper. Not the menacing growl of a hunter frustrated by difficult prey, but the confused, almost pitiful sound of a creature encountering something completely outside its evolutionary programming. Marcus's mind was being probed by psychic tendrils, and as if they had been burned, they retreated. "Increase the dampening field," Professor Vekshi commanded, but her assistant was too stunned to respond immediately. Marcus stood slowly, still maintaining eye contact with the creature. "It's all right," he said quietly, though whether he was addressing the class or the Void Stalker was unclear. The locks on the transport container had somehow broken. Whether through malfunction or the creature's own doing, none could say. The Void Stalker stepped out of its containment, its form becoming more solid with each step toward Marcus. Panic gripped the class. Emergency alarms began blaring, and several students activated personal teleportation devices, disappearing in flashes of light. Professor Vekshi was frantically calling for security while backing toward the exit, but Marcus remained perfectly calm, even as the galaxy's most efficient fear predator approached him. He extended one hand slowly, palm upward in a gesture that was somehow both submissive and welcoming. The Void Stalker sniffed at his hand, its form now almost entirely solid. Then, in a movement that defied everything the Galactic Academy knew about the species, it laid down at Marcus's feet, curled up like a contented pet, and closed its eyes. Except for the alarms that were gradually going off, the classroom was silent. "How?" Professor Vekshi whispered, her crystalline form dim with shock. Marcus looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think it's because I wasn't afraid," he said simply. "Humans have a saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. When you've survived extinction events, world wars, plagues, and countless other horrors throughout history, you develop a different relationship with fear." He gently placed his hand on the Void Stalker's head, and the creature's purring and sound no xenobiologist had ever recorded filled the chamber. "We don't eliminate fear," Marcus continued. "We acknowledge it, understand it, and choose our response to it. I think this little guy has never encountered a mind that could look directly at fear without being consumed by it. It must be very lonely, feeding on terror, but never experiencing simple acceptance." The Void Stalker's purring grew louder. In her report, Professor Vekshi later stated that the human race represented a fundamental shift in galactic psychology. They were apex predators who had learned to befriend their own fears, making them, perhaps, the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because of their capacity for violence, but because of their complete immunity to terror itself. As for Marcus, he continued attending classes with his new companion, sleeping peacefully at his feet, revolutionizing the study of interspecies psychology, one fear beast at a time.